Let's talk about acupuncture. It's a practice with roots that go back thousands of years, all built on this philosophy of energy and balance. But today, it's in a totally fascinating new spot, the modern research lab, where all those ancient theories are being put to the test by science.
So here's the big question for us in this explainer. For centuries, practitioners have used this ancient map of the human body, made up of hundreds of specific points. Now that we're looking at that same map with all the tools of modern biology, what are we actually finding?
All right, let's dive right in. And to do that, we have to start at the very beginning, with the core ideas that this whole thing is built on, which come straight out of traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM.
At the absolute heart of it all is this concept called qi. Now, in the traditional theory, qi is your body's vital energy. You get it from the air you breathe and the food you eat. And it's not just some vague idea. It's seen as the literal force that gets all your organs working. When your qi is full and flowing smoothly, you're healthy. When it's out of balance, well, that's where they believe disease comes from.
And listen, this is not some new age trend. We are talking about a system that was developed over thousands of years. The groundwork was laid way back during the Qin and Han dynasties. But it really got organized and written down around the 3rd century AD, with the first big comprehensive book on the subject. And from there, it became so established that by the Tang dynasty, it was an official part of state medicine.
Okay, so if qi is the energy, how did ancient practitioners think they could actually get in there and influence its flow? Well, that's where the map itself comes in. This really complex network of channels and points. These channels are called meridians. You can basically think of them as invisible highways for qi that connect everything in your body. And what's really interesting is that the early texts suggest that the goal was to activate the entire highway, the whole meridian, and that was even more important than hitting one single perfect spot.
Now, along these meridian highways, you find the landmarks, which are the acupoints. The World Health Organization has actually defined over 350 of them, and their locations are described with almost ridiculous precision. Just look at this example for a point on the thumb. It's measured in something called fei-kun, which is a traditional unit based on the patient's own body proportions. It's incredibly specific, and it's not random either. Practitioners use very specific combos of points, like BL23 and BL25, that are known to be used for things like low back pain.
But here's the million-dollar question, right? How can sticking a tiny needle just under the skin possibly create a real, measurable effect in the body? Well, let's switch gears and see how modern science is trying to answer that with some really compelling ideas. So the first theory is all about physics. It turns out that when an acupuncturist twists a needle, it literally grabs onto the web of connective tissue under your skin. This makes the cells in that tissue, they're called fibroblasts, stretch and change shape. That physical tug could be the first domino that sends a signal all throughout your body's internal structure. Okay, theory number 2 gets into the biochemistry. The idea here is that the physical poke of the needle might cause cells to release ATP, which is a molecule that also happens to work as a neurotransmitter. This whole process is called purinergic signaling, and it's a huge player in how our bodies handle pain and inflammation. So you can see the direct link to why so many people use acupuncture for pain relief.
And finally, a third theory focuses on a direct line to your brain. See, your skin is just packed with these tiny little sensors called TRP channels. They're what detect things like pressure, heat, and cold. So the simple act of a needle pushing on them can flip their switch, firing a signal straight into the nervous system. It basically translates that physical action into a biological message the brain can understand.
So, with these possible explanations in mind, researchers are not just sitting around theorizing. They are really putting acupuncture to the test in serious clinical trials for a whole range of conditions.
Let's look at one really specific and frankly very powerful example. Post-stroke depression is this awful complication that can seriously get in the way of recovery. So researchers in Taiwan decided to ask a simple question: could acupuncture actually help prevent it? The results they got from their massive population-wide study were kind of staggering. Stroke patients who got acupuncture frequently had a 52.5% lower risk of developing depression than the patients who got none at all. That is a huge number.
And when you dig into the data, you see it wasn't just a simple yes or no effect. There was a clear pattern. The people who just had a few sessions saw their risk drop by about 28%. But the frequent users, the ones with more than 5 sessions, saw their risk cut by more than half. Now that's the kind of dose-response data that really makes the medical community sit up and pay attention.
And the research doesn't just stop at mental health. Scientists are looking into it for all kinds of things, from smaller pilot studies showing it might help with vision problems like involuntary eye movement or even nearsightedness in kids, to bigger investigations looking at whether it's a cost-effective treatment for chronic pain, which is, a massive issue for so many people.
So you see what's happening here, right? We have this practice that has one foot in an ancient philosophical world and the other foot planted firmly in a modern research lab. And as you can probably guess, that creates some real complexities and some big debates within the field itself. One of the biggest areas you see this tension is in education. Some training programs are going all in on the biomedical stuff, explaining acupuncture using neuroanatomy, trigger points, things we can measure. But others are staying rooted in those more abstract, traditional concepts of qi and energy. And this creates a huge divide where some practitioners are speaking the language of modern medicine, while others, well, they can be dismissed by the establishment as practicing pseudoscience. Of course, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Anytime you're talking about puncturing the skin, even with these tiny, tiny needles, the most critical question is, what are the risks? Is it actually safe?
And the answer is pretty straightforward. It's safe, but only when it's done correctly. The risks are real. There are documented cases of bacterial infections. There have even been some nasty mycobacterial outbreaks in places like Canada and Korea. But here's the key. The problem is almost never the needle itself. It's usually contaminated equipment, things like cotton swabs, towels, even the disinfectant. It just goes to show how absolutely essential it is to have strict, rigorous safety standards.
So we end up here, at this really fascinating intersection, where an ancient map of the human body is literally being redrawn with the ink of modern biology. And as we keep investigating practices like this, it makes you ask a much bigger question, doesn't it? What does the future of medicine even look like when ancient wisdom and modern science finally start to speak the same language?